Today we're going to talk about hierarchy and why anarchists don't like it. Stick around. Welcome back, Conrads and non-rads alike. This is Q&Anarchy, the only show on the internet that's a discussion of politics. I'm your host, Slimeball Sue. Please excuse the noise of my air conditioner and fan running in the background. It's fucking 40 degrees Celsius in Toronto right now with the humidex. So, that sucks. Last time we talked about what anarchism is. It's a world without hierarchy. But what's bad about hierarchy? Well, think of the worst injustices in history. You've got racism and racism's children, genocide, apartheid, slavery. You've got things like sexism, classism, homophobia, biphobia, transphobia, all the phobias. You got serfdom, you got people not being able to cross-play Fortnite on the Nintendo Switch with their friends on PlayStation. You got all of these problems. What do they all have in common? Well, they're all systems which privilege one group at the expense of another. Oppression is definitionally hierarchical in nature. You can't oppress people if you don't have power over them. In the absence of coercive authority, meaning authority that is justified through violence or the threat of violence, oppression isn't possible. Now, you can still be a jerk, you can still be prejudiced, but you can't make people do things unless you have some sort of system which backs that up. And on some level, I'm sure you agree with a lot of this. I'm willing to bet that if I asked, you'd probably say that racism is wrong. Though, given some of the comments I receive on some videos I've made about racism, that may be a generous assumption. What separates us anarchists from most people is that we apply this analysis to everything. Rather than attempting to root out and identify oppressive hierarchies one by one, we start from the position that all hierarchies are unjust unless they can concretely prove themselves to be otherwise. Here's an example. If you go to work, chances are you have a boss. Chances are if your boss wasn't there, you would still know how to do your job and your job would be performed just as well. So, an anarchist would say, don't have a boss, dismantle this hierarchy. Even if it's not necessarily harmful, even if your boss is good at her job, it's still not necessary, and therefore, we don't need it. Get rid of it. But on the other hand, if you wanted to build a building, it would make sense to ask an architect if the design looked good, because otherwise the building would fall down. Anarchists don't necessarily ask you to reject someone's personal authority. We ask you to reject people's authority over others. So a good way to look at it might be that you can be an authority over something, but you can't possess authority over other people. Likewise, we don't reject the idea of organization or cooperation. In fact, we want people to organize and cooperate. We just think that it's more ethical and more practical for people to organize horizontally rather than vertically. A lot of people ask how an anarchist society would defend itself from outside aggression, because they think that in order to defend oneself you need the rigid structure of modern militaries. If people didn't obey the chain of command, then the military would have no discipline and they'd give up and die, and then we'd just get taken over by some jerk. But is that true? Because time and time again, we've seen that one of the best ways to deal with overwhelming force is a decentralized military operated by a bunch of autonomous cells. Even authoritarian regimes like ISIS or Al-Qaeda resort to decentralized networks of autonomous cells because it's the only thing that works. Military generals, strategists, highly paid consultants, they're not going to tell you that because they want you to think that they're necessary. Like all people in positions of power, they need you worse than you need them. Now that sounds maybe a little too simple when I put it that way, but it actually means a pretty radical rewrite of how we operate our society. We have to make it so that power comes from the bottom up rather than the top down. Right now, a lot of people believe that they're truly free. They believe that nobody has control over them, that nobody can tell them what to do. But that's not really true, is it? Chances are you spend up to a third of your life either at work or at school where people tell you what to do constantly. And if you disobey, you're going to be punished, or maybe even threatened with having your livelihood taken away. If you choose not to participate at all, you'll starve to death or die of exposure on the streets. So, not really freedom. Even in your so-called free time, You're not really free. Society is carefully monitored and controlled in ways that you don't control and you don't have a say in. You're constantly told where you can go, where it's okay to walk, where it's okay to stand, what is and is not appropriate. You want to play a guitar on the street? Hope you have a license. You want to put a bunch of books in a box in your front yard and call it a library and let people come and take the books? Sorry, that's against city bylaws. For some reason. Because you wouldn't want people getting books. Yeah, okay, sure, fine, yeah, sure, okay. But we've got democracy, right? The government reflects the will of the people. Nah, dog. We don't get to choose the rules, we get to choose the rulers. Well, actually, we get to choose some of the rulers occasionally, but the rest are actually appointed by the people we did choose with no democratic oversight whatsoever. Now granted, elected leaders have to campaign on promises of doing things that people might want, but they're not really recallable or punishable if they don't do it or don't even try. Elected officials also require nutter butter levels of cash to get elected, which makes them, shall we say, amenable to influence from the rich and powerful. Effectively, rich people can limit the scope of what is Effectively, the rich can limit the scope of the choices we're presented with, and thus enact their agenda with little or no opposition, all while maintaining the facade that we're in charge. Okay, yeah, I know how that sounds. That sounds like I'm about to say that lizards control the world or that Jews did 9/11 or some shit. I don't believe any of that. I'm not talking about the Illuminati or some anti-Semitic bullshit. I'm talking about regular, boring corruption. The type that we notice all the time but don't pay attention to because we're just used to it. Lobbyists, super PACs, weird fishy connections. These are all thumbs on the scale of democracy, making sure that your vote can only change so much. It's important to keep in mind that the people who designed these systems very much wanted to limit the scope and power of democracy. And they definitely wanted to control what types of people could hold power within society. Women weren't allowed to vote everywhere in my country until 1940. Native people weren't allowed to vote until 1960. That's the year my mother was born. A lot of people think that we can just reform these hierarchical systems. That sure, they might have been unjust in the past, and sure, they might have their problems now, but why throw the baby out with the bathwater? The typical liberal or centrist approach is to just add stipulations to how power can be exercised. And one by one, as these accumulate, eventually, you'll be unable to use power to hurt anyone, because we'll have caught it all. We'll have made laws for everything, and everything will be perfect, and nothing will hurt. Say, for example, that some guy runs a factory and he locks up his workers inside so they can't escape, and then a fire happens and they all burn to death horribly. A liberal solution might be, okay, we're going to make it illegal for you to lock people inside their place of work and mandate that everybody has fire escapes. But what we're not going to do is deal with the underlying symptoms that allowed this to happen in the first place. There's no reason to do that. We can just legislate away all our problems. And that approach might work, except that the rich and powerful control all of the mechanisms that we would use to place limits on their power. And they're not going to accept any radical change if it's too deleterious to their bottom line. So far, this is all sounding just a little bit defeatist. I'm not trying to bum you out. Here's the good news. We actually don't need these hierarchical systems. We can live without authority. But what that doesn't mean is just getting rid of all of it and seeing what happens in the ensuing power vacuum. We need to replace these institutions with decentralized, horizontal systems first. Things like worker cooperatives, which are businesses which are owned and run by everyone who takes part in that business, rather than just a few people that had the money to buy it. You don't really need those people. You already know how to run a business. The only reason we run businesses that way now is because it's beneficial to the people that own those businesses, not because it's the most productive or natural way to organize. Other examples include community gardens, autonomous living spaces, voluntary community self-defense, and free stores where people just donate stuff they're not using anymore, and then people can come and take it without the expectation that they're going to be paid back. Does that sound a bit too difficult to believe? Well, tough noogies, because it's already happening. We have everything we need right now to live without these coercive authorities. What's more, we can do it in a way that lets us all live healthy, fulfilling, and luxurious lives. So what's stopping us? That's what we're going to talk about next time, with the biggest and meanest hierarchy of them all, the state. Hey, I got patrons to thank. Special thanks to Ryan William Cox, Michael Hollenbach, Nicole the Anarchiduck, Matthew, Chorham, Julian Colin, J-Bugs III, Some Random Leftist, Jane, Pregnant Seinfeld, Patrick M., Jacob A. Berkowitz, Mia Nakano, Neil Zabildgard, Mike Yocom, Illusia S., Ree Carter, Brett Dibble, Thorn Melcher, Matt Brighton, and Live Static. Very special mad ups to Queen Maxine, Chuds McKenzie, Jordan Hoxie, Shaban O'Leary, Jen Anders Bremer, Aaron M., Actual Spook, Colbean Mani, and Dash of Week. Go to patreon.com/thoughtslime and give me money, or your nipples will fall off. Like this video and subscribe, but only if you want to, and don't let me tell you to do it because that's a hierarchy, and we just talked about that, guys.